Conor Khabib fight, I want to show that Conor did some excellent defensive work against Khabib's takedown. Um, he was very good at slowing it down in this case. I think Khabib would have got there in the end, but let's talk through this. Now, Conor's been on the ground. He's been absolutely battered by Khabib. At this point, we have Khabib. He's got his knee on belly, across his belly, just there, and he's forming like a triangle so that the Conor can roll around inside that. He's got a lot of control. I mean, Conor can't get up on the underhook at the moment because of the knee across belly. You can see the weight distribution, and Khabib is going to let go with the hands. The problem with this position is the only thing that is holding Conor down is this knee. So it's actually okay for Conor in the fact that if he gets a moment, he can get up. And what we will see is a moment where Conor does react. So Conor is reacting to Khabib making space for a punch. There. Okay, so Conor's waited for this moment. He's got his feet high up on the cage, which is, if he had only had his feet down here, he probably wouldn't be able to lift his hips as high. So he's got his feet well up the cage. It's again a beautiful piece of technique. He's taking a good punch for the opportunity to escape, and he's going to pop his hips up in the sky, and then he's going to turn his right hip to the ground, and he's going to feed this underhook through to try and get up. Absolutely timed perfectly. Okay, so we see him now sit up on an underhook. Alright, Khabib at this point has lost control of the situation, so he needs to get everything back under control. So he goes with his overhook, and he goes to controlling the head and arm. Okay, so he's got this lock here now. Because of the positioning of Khabib, normally what he would want, he'd want that hand underneath that armpit over there and this elbow to be tight against his hip. He doesn't have time to do that in this case, which means Conor can get both hands fixed to this hand on the left hand side. Conor is doing a fantastic job. He's got a post onto the ground, which is taking the sprawl weight onto the knee, and he's pushing everything back against the cage. Khabib would really want to drag him out in this direction, put him on his face again, but this post here is going to stop that, and it's going to allow Conor with both hands on this wrist to peel out the wrist. So we can see him have a baseball grip, and what he's going to do is he's going to rotate the wrist slightly in this direction. So he's going to turn the wrist towards us, so his grip will turn towards us, and he'll slowly try and get his ear to his shoulder. Alright, it's a common defence, but it works superbly. So he's now going to drive his ear to his shoulder as he makes room. You can see that he's opening the palm, so he's turning that palm out to face this direction, and that will allow him to break the grip, and it will allow him to pop his head out. Okay, so he took his ear to his elbow, and he turned the wrist outwards, which breaks the C grip. Okay, all down to Khabib not having time to get the grip deep enough. So this is lovely now. He has one foot down, and he's built his base here between his knee and thing. Everything's leaning against the cage. This is probably one of the most important parts of what he's doing. Everything's in against the cage, which means that Khabib can't get behind it. Okay, Khabib would want to keep his head above Conor's head, but Conor is gonna slide his way up the cage and build his base. Now I've been in an argument with somebody that said that not at this point. At this point would have been a perfect time for Khabib to sweep out these legs. I'm not sure. I don't think he can. I think there's a lot of pressure on there. I don't think he's got enough upper body control. Maybe they're right. I'm not sure. So what we're seeing here is we're seeing Conor's superb balance again. He's got everything tight against the cage on this side. He has his body weight slightly over the head of Khabib, and he's bent over to hold that. And this is, to me, is the most important bit. He's got this cross underhook. So he's got an underhook that's going round the neck, and from here it's lifting the chest of Khabib, and it's also holding the back of his elbow. Sorry, I just burped. Okay. This hand is controlling the wrist. The problem with controlling the wrist in this way is that the palm is up, which means that if Khabib lifts his hand, then he'll be able to pull his hand out. So we're going to see how he adapts and how he changes to this now. So we're getting to a better and better defense. Conor has to not let Khabib get his hands together, all right? If Khabib gets his hands together, it's devastating. So he's tucked his elbow into his hip. His hip is against the cage. His back is against the cage. This thigh is against the cage. He wants to get this leg against the cage. Also, what he's doing is he's making distance with this hip. So he's turning slightly towards Khabib. So he's gauging where Khabib is with his hip. He's got his underhook lifting and controlling this arm, and he's desperately trying not to get these hands together. We can see that Khabib has already got his hand out of this upward-facing grip. All right, quite easy to escape. Move a little bit forward, and we can see Conor throw a knee as Khabib controls his arm. Might as well try. And then he goes back to trying to control the wrist. The problem here is Khabib is now controlling his wrist, and he's forcing it against the cage. The underhook is still working. He's turned his body more. So what he wants to do is he wants all his body weight on this leg, and he wants this hip facing Khabib. If his hip was flat against the cage, Khabib could get into doing things like hip throws and reaps and things like that. But because he's facing this direction with his hip, it's going to be difficult for Khabib to get in deep enough without pulling Conor off the cage to get a hip throw or anything else. If he does get a reap on this leg, which he will in a moment, then because Conor can quite happily take his body weight over the top of this leg and over the top of Khabib, that's fantastic. What he needs to stop is Khabib getting underneath him or stepping into the control zone. So we'll carry on. We've got Conor lifting Khabib with that strange underhook, and we've got Khabib controlling the wrist. Now Conor will break out of that grip, or Khabib will go for the body lock. I don't know which one it is. I've looked at this for quite a while. I mean, Conor is reaching for that wrist, and I think Khabib at the same time is going for the body lock. I think Conor's got a lot of pressure down here. He's holding the back of the triceps. He's stopping Khabib getting any lower on him or getting his head any deeper. So Khabib really at this point would be trying to drive his head across. Conor's body's in the way. Because he's turned laterally, it's a long distance for him to go through. So he's stopping Khabib getting any deeper on his body. So he reaches for the body lock, and we get Conor putting a nice elbow into the head, and then he tries to go back to controlling the wrist, another elbow, and now he's controlling the wrist. Problem is, Khabib at this point has got his hands together. As soon as Khabib gets his hands together, he's applying a lot of force to Conor's shoulders to try and flatten him out, and he's trying to get his leg for an outside reap. We can't really see it very effectively here, but this leg is trying to go into the back of this leg, and he's trying to pull it out. But the problem is Conor's based out against the cage and based out against the floor on this leg. Khabib is effectively kind of holding him up by the position that he's taking, but it's the positioning of Conor that is going to stop this leg reap. So we see him step in for the leg reap, and we see him hop Conor in this direction. I think what he would want it to do is he wanted to change the direction of Conor and make him sit on his backside, but he can't do that. Conor is fighting too hard. He's lifting and he's separating, which is making this a very difficult grip. As long as Conor can keep his hands down low, that sweep is ineffective. So we get him to move along. We've got Khabib now in a very dangerous position. He's switched out, and he's got his C grip on the single leg. Conor's underhook is saving him here, lifting the body, and he's pushing down with his leg. So actually the pressure and the balance is through Khabib at the moment. Khabib would have to do something to this leg, all right, or he would have to lift Khabib. But this knee is stopping Khabib getting his hips in close enough to be able to lift Conor. Now, Khabib's super strong, so maybe he could load him up with this knee. But the problem is, if he pulls and lifts in this direction, Conor will just put that foot down. Would he sweep that? I'm not sure. But we're seeing Conor defend this beautifully. It's a nice palm to the face, and he goes out to the wrist again, okay? And once he grabs the wrist, he's going to yank Khabib up with the underhook, and he's going to separate the wrists. Absolutely gorgeous job there. Khabib almost instantly goes back to his grip, but Conor is stopping him being able to use that underhook. He's stopping Khabib being able to go down to set up a lift. Khabib needs to come in and then stand up. He needs to be able to step up and stand up. Because Conor's lifting him up, he would only just be able to step in. There'd be no lift. So Conor is doing everything wonderfully here. Turning the body. His weight's still on this leg here. This leg really doesn't matter. He's gauging hips with his own hips here. So if Khabib did come in, he'd be able to feel the hips. So it's just a fantastic all-round job from Conor. Keeping the wrists separate, he separates out the wrists, and Khabib now goes back to wanting to get his hands together around the body lock. And we can see what Conor is doing at this point. He's keeping his elbow tucked against the cage, not necessarily controlling the wrist, but he's keeping his elbow tucked against the cage, he's keeping his hip tucked against the cage, and he's putting something in the way of Khabib being able to get his hands together. Keep moving forward, and we can just see Conor controlling this arm. Now, Khabib is starting to realise he needs to do something a little bit stronger and a little bit harder to try and get Conor down. So what he wants to do is he wants to flatten Conor back against the cage so that he can pressure the body up, and then he's going to try and redrive back down and get his hands together again. But he doesn't manage it. Conor's grip on here is beautiful. He's got one on the tricep, lifting, weight down on him. He's got elbow on the inside of this hand that will stop the hands getting together, and he's controlling the bicep here. I mean, it's all defensive at the moment for Conor, but he's stopping that. Gives Khabib a quick slap, which I don't think is a very good idea, but then goes back with the elbow to blocking that hand. Okay, Khabib at this point, when he moves his hand up to the bicep, what he wants to do is put his hand on the bicep and then slide down to control the wrist. So he controls the wrist again. And Conor twists his arm Aikido style. So Khabib is holding the opposite hand, but he's got his palm facing the ceiling, which means if Conor rotates his wrist in this direction, so the palm's facing down at the moment, he wants to turn the palm to the ceiling and then out, he can extract his wrist. By the way, if you ever want to control someone's wrist, I would suggest you do it in this manner. So if you go back to where he controls that wrist, what Khabib has done is he's put his hand on the bicep, yeah, because the bicep doesn't move as much as the wrist. If you try and catch a moving wrist, you'll never do it. Bicep doesn't move around as much as the wrist, which is a much longer lever. I mean, I always teach my guys to put the hand on the shoulder and then run the hand down to the wrist, because the shoulder doesn't really move anything like a wrist. Okay, but anyway, just a little detail. Tell me to shut up if you want. So he's going to twist his wrist out. So you can see him turn his wrist out. Khabib goes back to the grasp, and he goes back to trying to hold the bicep and tricep. Khabib's now lifting his head up. He's trying to get Conor's shoulder flat to the cage, and then what Khabib would do is try and get out and put his hips against the cage, slowly try and work his way behind Conor. This is all beautiful work by Conor. Look at the pressure down on there. He doesn't worry about his hip that Khabib's on. All he's worried about is stopping those hands getting together. See that elbow on the inside? Creating distance so that those hands cannot reach each other. He's doing a fantastic job. Even allows himself a little strike, and then goes back to controlling the bicep. Khabib has a little bit of a cheat there where he holds a cage for a second, but we won't mention Conor's level of cheating in this. And just controlling that bicep with the elbow on the inside of the wrist on his hip. Fantastic. Now he goes out to wrist control. This is Conor's first bit of wrist control. It's going to make life much harder for Khabib. So Conor is actually, at this point, winning the takedown game before it all finishes. Oh, and look at him. They don't. They always look like, oh, you didn't take me down that time. And Khabib's like, I get you next time. Okay. So that was absolutely beautiful work by Conor. We can see that just tilting his body in the right direction, engaging that hip, not worrying too much about what one leg he's doing because his centre of gravity is burst out on the other one, which Khabib can't get to because he can't control. He hasn't got his grip, which he loves, his C shape around the single leg or around the hips. It's just a fantastic piece of work by Conor. So if you're ever wrestling against a Khabib or someone like Khabib, it looks like a fantastic way of developing a takedown defense. If you can do it, fantastic. Conor does really good there, but he does get tired quick. So eventually Khabib will get him. It's a bit of a shame, really. Okay, thank you very much. Good luck.